G.I. Joe Battle Corps! We're gonna knock you cold!
If one thing could be said about G.I. Joe, a real American hero, it's that Hasbro consistently made changes to keep the line fresh one year after another. What started out as a primarily traditional green military look would slowly evolve to include biker gangs, real-life celebrities, and eventually neon colors splashed all over their branding. And along with the continual sweeping changes, Hasbro would rename its main line of 1993 G.I. Joe toys as the Battle Corps, a wide sub-branding that would encapsulate several dozen characters for both the Joe and Cobra factions. Certainly, G.I. Joe, a real American hero, had a huge range of offerings in the 1993 calendar year, what with over 100 figures and vehicles, as well as the 12-inch scaled Hall of Fame line. Thus, what I thought I would do here is segment out the Battle Corps portion into its own individual upload. So let's begin. Hasbro had always been known for exerting its dominance as a toy company over several decades. But in this penultimate year for G.I. Joe, a real American hero, Hasbro would face a number of changes as well as challenges. As mentioned, the regular mainline releases for G.I. Joe were additionally branded with the Battle Corps logo adjacent to the standard G.I. Joe naming scheme. And you can see how some characters from 1992 got some new figure colors as well as adding this Battle Corps sub-branding for 1993. Thus, the Battle Corps were not a traditional type of G.I. Joe sub-team like the more specific operational-based groups like Tiger Force, Python Patrol, and others. Card back sizes were also larger when you compare them to the Joe figures of the past, a change that was made at the request of retailers to match the card sizing of other action figures in the toy aisle. Additionally, the weapons tree was included for many figures, which meant that you'd need to peel and remove the weapons from the sprues that they were attached to, and this is in contrast to what we saw previously with individual accessories packed into the card bubbles. There was also a choking hazard warning added to the packaging as part of the changes for this 1993 year. And in terms of industry-wide challenges, while Hasbro had enjoyed success at being ahead of other companies sharing the same competitive retail space, toy rival Mattel would acquire the company Fisher-Price in 1993, a key acquisition given that Mattel had come up short in its attempt to acquire Tonka previously, as Tonka was purchased by Hasbro in 1991. Closing the gap in competition, Mattel was ready to compete on the same level as Hasbro again. And this was evident by the end of 1993 when both Hasbro and Mattel finished the year with similar sales records, as both companies came in at just north of $2.7 billion each. Note that includes company-wide sales in all divisions, far beyond that of just the action figure genre. That said, for G.I. Joe alone, Hasbro would end 1993 with $88 million in sales. That in of itself is not a bad number, but given the 100+ figures, plus vehicles, and the 12-inch scaled Hall of Fame toys that Hasbro released, one does have to consider that they had much higher earnings with G.I. Joe in previous years with less items on the market. Looking into the Battle Corps figures directly, we had a new character by the name of Colonel Courage, who designer Kurt Groen has noted that he had this high-ranking officer wearing a tie as well as boots as inspired by the real-life officer General Patton, who served in World Wars I and II. We had the return of another high-ranking officer, namely the Admiral of the 1985 USS Flag, Keel Hall. It had been a long while since his previous release, and now he came released on a card instead of with the large aircraft carrier. We got another version of General Flag, and since he was a repaint of his first release, he's among the figures that didn't get a weapons tree in his card bubble, being released with more traditionally packed weapons. This will be the case for a few of the repainted figures in this 1993 range. Here's Bulletproof, who's now advertised as an urban commander, where previously he was known as the leader of the DEF, or Drug Elimination Force, in 1992. And now would be a good time to mention that there were indeed plans to expand the range of DEF and enemy headhunters that had debuted in 1992. We'd have seen 9 more figures and the Shark vehicle included in 1993, but these never made it to release in US markets, so what's shown here are some early engineering pilot figures. Thus, as things got shifted around, the packaging was altered and the planned figures and Shark vehicle were moved to the Battle Corps lineup, at least in the US. We'll come back to this topic later. And assisting with our Battle Corps leadership structure was another version of the field leader, Duke. Kurt Groen has stated that Duke's design here was largely based on the 1991 12-inch figure released as a Target exclusive that kicked off the G.I. Joe Hall of Fame line, and his uniform pattern is meant to match that of Desert Storm. We also got a new version of the anti-aircraft soldier in Backblast, as well as a recolor of the bunker buster known as Barricade. And we got an update of the fan favorite missile specialist Bazooka, now sporting a more fisherman type of look. The Tough as Nails Ranger, who was also another fan favorite in Beachhead, was also back. And then we got a release of the former Havoc driver in Cross Country. This figure is controversial in that it has a Confederate battle flag on the back, which is covered up when you put the backpack on. Now, for Arctic conditions, we got another release of Frostbite. Here's this year's version of Iceberg, notable for the snowboard accessory that he comes with. And in terms of other Arctic releases, we got 2 versions of Snowstorm this year. And various sources show 2 different sub-team plans for Snowstorm initially, before he ultimately ended up as part of the Battle Corps. Creating G.I. Joe Volume 11 states that there were plans considered to put Snowstorm into the Star Brigade subset. On the other hand, the Art of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero Omnibus states that there was a plan to continue the Eco Warriors sub-team, and that they were planning to put the version of Snowstorm with the orange deco in that grouping. That is, until plans were scrapped for an Eco Warriors continuation. Alas, we have 2 color schemes of the character in the same release year, as Snowstorm's other release comes with a blue deco scheme rather than the brighter orange that would have matched the Eco Warriors. And the same could be said for Outback. The brighter release was initially meant as part of the ill-fated Eco Warriors continuation, and we had another release with the colors that weren't as bright. In any case, like Snowstorm, both versions ended up being branded with the regular Battle Corps releases. For new versions of other characters, we also got a 3rd release of Law, as well as Leatherneck with a different camo. And like Bulletproof, we saw some rehashed names from the 1988 Cops and Crooks line by Hasbro. They gave us this character named Longarm, as well as an undercover operative named Mace. Designer Kurt Groen has stated that he wanted Mace's design to represent what FBI and drug enforcement agencies were wearing during that time. We got a revised version of Muskrat, who was now considered as a heavy fire specialist rather than being a swamp fighter. And the ever-popular duo of Mutt and Junkyard made yet another appearance in this Real American Hero toy line. As far as other favorites are concerned, we got this version of Roadblock, who's the team's usual heavy machine gunner. On that note though, we should mention that the previous version, known in fan circles as the recalled version of Roadblock in 1992, that is, the one with the problematic, unreliable launching device, would see a re-release of that same figure in 1993, but now with the Battle Corps branding and a new set of accessories. So when considered like this, in a way we can say that we got 2 versions of Roadblock this year when counting the revision to his 1992 release. Additionally, the US Marine Gung Ho would appear carrying the US flag again like he did in his 1992 version. And rounding out the carded range for our heroes would be more recolors, such as Wetsuit with an orange deco scheme compared to his previous year's yellow deco scheme. And we also got this recolored version of Wild Bill. For heroic vehicles, here's the aforementioned Shark 9000. And zooming in, you can still see the DEF logo on the vehicle shown on the box. This version of Cutter was included with the Shark 9000, much like how he was included with the Whale hovercraft in 1984. This vehicle has an interesting backstory. While Bill Young is credited as the designer, another employee named Alan Ferraro built an early model for the Shark 9000. The design team would add a deco label that would read AJ followed by some numbers. This letter and number designation is a tribute to Alan Ferraro's son named AJ. AJ, due to complications, was born 3 months premature, with the February 5th, 1992 birth date being the reason as to why the decal reads with his initials and birthday. As something of a happy ending to this part of the tale, AJ would not only survive the birth complications, but would grow up into an adult serving as an officer in the US Army. For flying vehicles, the Battle Corps had the Ghost Striker X-16, a high-tech, image-targeting combat jet, and we got some more familiarity as it came with the well-known G.I. Joe pilot, Ace. And representing the Battle Corps vehicles on land, we got the all-terrain 4x4 battle truck known as the Mudbuster. Looking at the villains, we got a 6th version of Cobra Commander in a black color scheme where most of the figure was a reuse of the 1992 Talking Battle Commander's version of him. He came with silver weapons, thus creating a nice looking color contrast. Here's the Battle Corps version of Dr. Mindbender, who's more brightly colored than his original 1986 release. The Saboteur, Firefly, also returned as part of the Battle Corps, and he's another well-known fan favorite, albeit on the villain side. The Night Creepers added to their ranks this year with the Ninja Master known as the Night Creeper Leader, and the Crimson Guard also added to their upper echelon with an elite officer in the Crimson Guard Commander. For other army builders, here's a revised version of the Alley Viper, now clad in a yellow and black color scheme. Here's the Cobra Eels for underwater demolitions. Albeit, this Eels release has a slightly different color scheme compared to the 1992 version, and he swaps out the torpedo-launching Shark Robot for a more standard-looking spring-loaded launcher. The Flak Viper, with his anti-aircraft, dual spring-loaded launchers, was back in a revised color scheme compared to the previous 1992 release. And we had this version of the Heat Viper, who's the Cobra team's high-explosive and anti-tank related trooper. As we get to the end of the carded range, here's Gristle, who's an urban crime commander. And for crime-related street work, here's a second version of the Headhunters, now branded as Battle Corps, whereas the first version from the previous year was branded as the Narcotics Guard for the Headman. Now for the next evolution of the Headhunters, we had the elite urban crime guards known as the Headhunter Stormtroopers. You'll notice that I saved Gristle, the Headhunters, and the Headhunter Stormtroopers for later in the discussion for this carded figure range. And that's because these three were supposed to be part of the previously mentioned DEF vs Headhunters set that was planned but not released in the US. However, interestingly enough, this planned 1993 range was released in Australia on these DEF branded card backs, thus making them something of an international variant for enthusiastic collectors who like to see something a little bit different. Now for Cobra vehicles this year, we had the Detonator for long-range assault. This vehicle came with the Nitro Viper. Strangely, the Nitro Viper was unique in that it was not released with a file card. However, G.I. Joe fan Michael Livanos created a file card that ended up being sanctioned by Hasbro and released later on in the Action Figure News and Toy Review magazine for 1994. And finally, the other Cobra vehicle we got this year was the Ice Snake, a fast attack Arctic vehicle. A few other tidbits worth pointing out are that there would be select mini-comics as well as trading cards packed in with some of the toys. And additionally, there were a couple of different mail-away inserts so that you could mail in for some figures from Hasbro. Now, while the Battle Corps theme would carry on into 1994, that 1994 year would see the end of the 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe A Real American Hero toy line as we knew it. Thus, we would see a cancellation on the otherwise planned follow-up range known as the Battle Corps Rangers that would have taken the G.I. Joe Battle Corps branding past 1994. Transitioning quickly to the comic, in 1993 we'd see things like Scarlet train with Ninja Force, and we'd also see a crossover with the Transformers, who were now experiencing an attempted resurgence with their Generation 2 rebranding. Overall, 1993 was a competitive year for action figures as a whole. With the debut of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers to Western audiences, they'd eat up a considerable segment of the same market share as G.I. Joe, given that during the fall of 1993, Power Rangers topped all other programs among children during the weekday morning time slot. And with the G.I. Joe Deke cartoon having already concluded prior to 1993, it became very difficult for G.I. Joe to compete with Power Rangers. That and the superhero genre was going strong by 1993, not just with the cartoons, but with larger scaled figures for kids to play with rather than the traditional 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe sized figures. Additionally, G.I. Joe struggled to maintain $100 million in sales during the 1990s, with the aforementioned 1993 year dipping to $88 million. By comparison, Batman could reel in $500 million, so the writing was really on the wall for our favorite real American heroes. Furthermore, corporate-wide changes at Hasbro would see the sun slowly set on the G.I. Joe brand as a whole. Alas, G.I. Joe would meet its end in the following year during the summer of 1994. Even though the actual plan to end G.I. Joe occurred earlier on in the same summer, August 16, 1994 would infamously come to be known as Black Tuesday. On this day, a significant amount of Hasbro staff was let go from the Rhode Island office, where G.I. Joe was stationed. This made things bittersweet when the G.I. Joe International Collectors Convention was held from August 20th to 21st in 1994 at the USS Intrepid in New York. Among the survivors was Kirk Bazigian, who'd been both a G.I. Joe brand team member and the VP of Boys Toys at Hasbro. But he'd be taken off of the G.I. Joe brand to work elsewhere in the company. We'll cover 1994 more closely when we get the chance, but for now, the idea here was to look back at the second last year of G.I. Joe in 1993 to see what Hasbro did before ultimately deciding to shut down its Real American Hero brand. Maybe you loved or maybe you hated the various sub-teams in 1993, or perhaps you have certain feelings about Hasbro's attempt at collaborating with Capcom's Street Fighter II. You may have felt that the Battle Core was meant for you as a child and later on as a collector, or you may have felt all along that it wasn't as good as what the brand did earlier on in its existence. In any case, it all played a big role for G.I. Joe's history during the 1990s. And if you happen to like this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I'm gonna put another G.I. Joe related history video that you can click on right over here, or to learn about a completely different toy history topic, you can click on this video right over here. And with that, yo Joe, and I'll see y'all next time. Thanks for watching, and take care.